Here's the thing, right? Don Lemon, as a visible Black gay man who had the platform that he had, was also, you know how we always talk about Bill Cosby and how Bill Cosby was going around here telling people to pull up their pants and was like really embracing respectability, right?
It sounds like we've already moved into the anti. Go ahead on, get in there.
Well, I'm using a very specific example, right? Bill Cosby was going around here telling people to pull up their pants and saying that, like, you know, we as Black people, if we wanted respect, then we have to respect ourselves, right? That was Bill Cosby's thing.
Can I ask you to pause right there? Don, this is where you should probably stop watching.
Don Lemon also expressed similar thoughts, right, about how we as Black people should be showing up in the world and moving through the world for the sake of white consumption and white appeal, right? Like, those are just the facts. You can go find the clips if you want, but I was there, okay? I remember witnessing it. I remember the social media discourse, right, about it, right? All of the think pieces that came out about it. And so it's interesting to juxtapose a lot of the work that at least we remember because of the ways in which it either felt like some sort of betrayal to many in Black community, right? That you had this Black man, this Black gay man telling us as Black people that we shouldn't say nigga, or automatically assuming and perpetuating a host of stereotypes while he's covering, right, something as tragic as what went down in Ferguson, right? And then also, for the most part, him not seemingly being open to the feedback that was being lodged his way from community, right? And so it's interesting to juxtapose his kind of representational place for all those things that we listed in the fan side of this conversation up against the actual work, or at least the bits and pieces of the work that seemingly most resonate and stick with the culture. That's something that's tough for me to I shouldn't say tough, but like reconciling that is interesting, to say the least.
When you said, you know how Bill Cosby, I was like, oh, here we go. Okay.
Listen.
Get in.
Listen.
Friend, you did that.
You know, she showed
really
up,
did.
okay?
She's
showed
in her
up.
bag today, and I appreciate it. Oh, God. I was like, oh, girl, go off. Go all the way in. What I think is actually really important here is, like, Don Lemon, I think, represents a moderate part of the community, right? That doesn't think we should be saying nigga.
Which community?
Of Black community.
Oh, the
right?
Black community.
Of Black folks,
okay.
right? Like, there are
just
a lot of people
to verify.
who would, yeah.
To verify.
To be fair. And like, oh, blackest of Jesuses, blackest of
Caller.
Jesuses. Okay.
Caller.
But there are a lot of people who see the world the way that Don does, right? And like that more progressive folks are like not really fucking with anymore, or are pushing back up against him, being like, yeah, I don't fuck with you on that. Or actually, you don't need to be telling me how I should speak, or you need to be thinking about how you talk about this community, or you need to be thinking about how you address women and those different kinds of things, right? I think we have aunties and uncles and grandparents, or even people who are our age that see the world in that way. And I think that it's kind of interesting in Black community, we really police the lines of Blackness and how we see things, and kind of push people away when they don't agree with certain parts of community. And like, Don squarely falls within that space, right, where he's had pushback because he wasn't progressive enough for people. And I think it was a lot of fair pushback.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's also important to note. Well, side note, while you were speaking, you mentioned that, you know, he was kind of moderate or whatever. Did you know, I was doing my research for this episode, did you know that he was a Republican back in the day? And what?
I did not know that, but
this is public information. When he was in school, apparently he was a Republican. He voted for Reagan. And then I believe it was in 2019, 2018, he, made this whole big deal on, his show about being an independent, like a registered, independent, as a means of, I guess, delineating, right, that moderateness,
Hmm.
moderality.
Wow.
The fact of him being, moderate in his positioning. But I wanted to note that it's also kind of, I think a lot about our growing success as individuals and how it's hard to be quote unquote successful in this world with these systems that we are under, and not in big ways and small ways capitulate to whiteness and what is ultimately white supremacy. And I wonder if said moderateness and like middle of the line approach to, understanding and seeing issues also contributed to all of that representational success, right? That we mentioned,
Mm.
because he was able to, affect some sort of affinity with, more conservative people across racial and ethnic identities, as well as perhaps some of the more progressive folks. Because right in the last few years, Don Lemon got black, as the community like to say, right? Like post Ferguson, post that, you know what it is. Like he literally, right, like the week before, either the week of or the week before he was fired, right? He literally was going back and forth with this, conservative person who was, trying to twist the history, right, as it relates to black folks and guns in this country, right? And so Don Lemon was, literally took the entire segment. It was an issue for his co-host to like push back on that, right? So he's blackified um, over the last few years in particular. And that's been interesting to witness as well, right? Just the overall shifts in how he goes about articulating his various feelings about particular things.
I think often about the ways that we police the boundaries of blackness, and like one of those ways is in politics, and how and like where we stand on politics, right? And while I think about, I come from a really liberal progressive lens, right? And I get that. And I also think that when we are looking at people who don't see the world in the same way, we question their blackness, or we measure their blackness. Because I mean, I've been doing the same thing. I'm like, oh, Donda got real black. Like he didn't really lean in, right? But I also don't think that that measure is fair to people, right? In the same ways that like we do that because of their partners and their ethnicities, and we do that because of the way that they speak or dress or whatever, what have you. But I think that like we've seen, especially in the Trump years, I think we've seen even more conservative black folks really get a lot stronger about how they feel about their blackness, about their politics, about the way they view the world, about the way they see this country. And I can tell you just from the people that I know that are in that Don Lemon kind of age group and demographic of lens, I've seen those people get a lot more radicalized than I've ever seen before, in similar ways to like we've seen on the other side as well, right? Because I know for myself, like when I was younger, like I wasn't thinking about politics. I remember being in high school and thinking George Bush was on some bullshit, right? But like I wasn't thinking about race in the same way that I was until I moved to Atlanta and went to Clark and was like able to like be immersed in blackness. The Bay Area is like really diverse, and I wasn't thinking about race in the same way until I got older. And so when I see Don nowadays, I'm thinking like it's not about age. I think it's about the time we're in and like the things that we've been through. Because like Don was saying things 10 years ago that right now we would be like, I know you fucking lying, because we were the more progressive people were saying it back then.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so like I'm challenged there because like I see like we can kind of track his progress here, but it's also like I can't agree with him on everything, right? Or there's a lot of times when Don has come out and said things when I've been like, why the fuck would you say that, right? But also as a black journalist and as a leader amongst black journalists, when he got fired, I sent him a message because he said like, I don't know, the way he presented it initially, I was like, if you need support from black journalists or from this association, like, let me know, right? I haven't heard from him, but like we also have to like be supportive in those moments as well. It's a weird dichotomy to be in.